including spiritual. Like, if you think about God as like a being that we relate to, have a relationship with. So we're designed this way. We're designed to have these social connections. The challenge is, right, is that we're really susceptible to peers and peer pressure and the risky behaviors that can come with all the other adolescents who are going through the same nonsense and their risky behaviors, and they're really susceptible to that. I have learned in my practice, when I'm dealing with an adolescent, I can ask about their home environment, I can ask about their school activities, I can ask about their academic development. If I am not spending the most of my time on who are your friends, who do you spend time with, your peers? Do you have them? What are they doing? What are they looking like? Are they using substances? Are they doing well in school? If I'm not exploring that, I'm missing one of the biggest pieces, because I can't help a teen. I can't help an adolescent if they want to stop using an addiction, if they want to improve their grades, if they're going to still be hanging out with people that are not doing well in school or don't care about school, or if they're hanging out with people that are using substances, there's nothing I can do. I can't help them if we don't address the peer thing first, because they're so susceptible to this. It's not true for adults, right? As much, right? I want to address, people's relationship with others, but for adults, it's not like the number one key issue like that really matters the most. This is, by the way, not just my opinion. This is science-based. This is like everyone in child adolescent, mental health will agree with me. It's about the peers. Deal with the peers. So our parents weren't wrong very much when they were like, you can only hang. Well, my dad wasn't super wrong, although maybe he would do it differently. But he wasn't super wrong in that, like, yeah, you have to hang out with certain people and like church people and that kind of thing, because he understood to some degree, right, how important. Sorry, apparently this is my therapy. I'm so sorry. But yeah, thank you for. I'll pay you all later. So biologically, what's happening is you have an increase in a specific hormone called oxytocin. So we didn't talk about hormones yet. We have an endocrinologist here. A lot of people, when they think about adolescence, like it's just the hormones. Strictly speaking, it's not. Hormones do play a role. The big ones are oxytocin, as we'll talk about, the testosterone, estrogen, sex hormones. Those are the big ones in terms of adolescent development. However, there's a lot more going on. It's not just hormones. Am I right in saying this? Right. So like, I think that like, I often get parents that they're like, something's wrong with my kid, test their hormones. I'm like, Habibi, like that's gonna do nothing for us. Like that's like a part of it. And even then, like, it's very unlikely that like we're gonna test hormones and like be revealed that like, oh, we need to do something differently. So don't focus on the hormones. Oxytocin, though, does play a role. What's happening is in the social brain networks, so this is specifically the connection between our prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is that white part. It's the part that kind of really is behind your forehead. This connection with the center of your brain, your amygdala, okay? There's a big pathway that's being developed, and in that pathway, there's a lot of influence of oxytocin. There's a surge. Oxytocin, as you may have heard, colloquially, I actually don't love this, I don't know if you do either. It's colloquially, pop psych, they call it the love hormone, because it is the hormone that is most present, or you get surges of it during delivery of a baby, and also during the breastfeeding, and then also like with physical touch. Those are the most common reasons why it's surged, but it's surging significantly also during adolescence. So yeah, it does play a role in sort of our social connection, but yeah, love I think is a lot deeper, more complicated than that. It's not a hormone. Anyway, the benefits of this, right, is, oh, yeah, we talked about. So, okay. Since we're talking about hormones, let me also talk about some of the other things. Like the testosterone and estrogen are very involved, right? So we actually know that biologically there are subtle differences that are really happening in adolescence between the female brain and the male brain because of the exposure to testosterone versus estrogen. There are many books on the differences between the male and female brain if you're interested. But what they're doing, generally in adolescence is they're playing a role in the social connectedness. They're also playing a role in their interest in intimacy and sex, right? So as you know, like teenagers have this big interest, that is a biological thing, right? So that's often what people are talking about when they talk about hormones, like, oh my gosh, my teenager's turning in from this like sweet kid that like now wants to hang out with girls and like talking about things that, just are shocking to us as grown-ups. There's a part of us, there's a part of it that is biological, that is, we're developed to start having those thoughts and experiences. We are also developed to do that in connection with God, right? In an understanding. So it shouldn't be, what happens is that development happens in an isolation from God or connection with their parents. And so then it takes on this meaning that is harmful. But if we develop in a way that's connected with an understanding about how God has given us intimacy and sex, and understand what that could look like in a practical way from our parents who have a healthy relationship, that makes all the difference. I think I'll just make another point here. I encourage us as the grown-ups here to remember that if we were to leave adolescents to develop on their own without being able to relate to us and have it kind of tempered in a way, we will get adolescents that are that grow up into adults that stay as adolescents. Does that make sense? So we get adults that end up seeing me. So what happens, so it's really important for us to not give up on connecting and guiding and growing. It's easier for us to say, like, I just don't get this is too weird, too foreign, they're so irritating and annoying, and to disconnect. I urge you to take a beat and then focus on reconnection, because that's going to be the key to allowing them to do this development thing in a healthy way. Adolescent development doesn't work in a vacuum. It only works with healthy grown-ups supporting it. Does that make sense? Okay. So the N is the novelty seeking, right? So adolescents generally have this natural inclination towards exploration, experimenting, risk-taking, new experiences. Again, why is that? That's the dopamine. That's that they're so sensitive to it, they're so craving it all the time, biologically, right? That they are looking for that dopamine hit. Now, that also means during your adolescent years, you are the most vulnerable to addiction, right? So the majority, when I'm exploring people's experience with addiction, whether it's behavioral addictions like gambling and sex addictions or gaming addictions, or it's substances, the majority of people who really struggle with like chronic addiction, they started the behavior in adolescence. It starts getting wired in, because what's happening, right? You're doing the use it or lose it. All the synaptic pruning of other things gets taken away. Then it gets myelinated. Then you get the dopamine surging it, making it so enjoyable, so rewarding. Now you've set up the brain for addiction. This is actually the reason why there are legal limitations to things like alcohol. It's not just because my understanding is it's not just because of we want them to make better decisions. It's actually biological. It's brain. Their brain isn't ready for something so addictive or has that potential, versus if you start using alcohol in your mid-20s, your risk for actually developing a chronic addiction is very much lower. Does that make sense? Okay. So any questions about that so far? The adolescent brain is very what we call plastic, which means it's very susceptible to changes, it's very vulnerable. That's beautiful in the sense that it's a critical window for learning. So the flip side of this is, yes, there's danger if you're exposed to addiction, but if you're exposed to good things like a sport or hymns or whatever, then you learn it and it sticks with you better if it's done through adolescence. The majority of Olympic athletes, I don't think it's very rare for an Olympic athlete to start their sport in their 20s. They usually have to start actually kind of, pre-adolescence to kind of get the brain, the synapses going, and then during adolescence to keep it, to reinforce it, and then they'll be able to excel. But if you start in your late 20s, you don't have that benefit of the plasticity. Languages is another one, right? Like, you could go down all the examples. This also means during adolescence are more susceptible to trauma and stress. So then both pre-adolescents and also grown-ups. So adolescent trauma is a big hit because of what's happening in the brain. The last thing is the creative exploration, so that they are, open to new ideas, ways of thinking. This is great in the way that the benefits are that they, are problem solving, doing the identity formation. The challenges is that they're resistant to traditional authority and structure, right? And so I think a lot of us, especially from like a culture where tradition and authority really is important, kind of feel really prickly about that. But if we remember that this is like a normal part of adolescence and really trying to understand, okay, how do we then still maintain authority and respect, but also like pivot to kind of meet their needs for wanting to test the limits and wanting to kind of say like, does this person really have authority over me, right? This is all happening because there's growth in the prefrontal cortex and the connectivity to the amygdala and the limbic system. Before I get into that, I want to share with you a part of the brain that not a lot of people talk about. It's this network of very small areas of the brain called the DMN, the default mode network. This is the area of the brain that explodes during adolescence, and it's the area of the brain associated with like self-reflection, ability to kind of like think about their life in like an autobiographical way, the daydreaming, the kind of thinking about the future. It's the self-formation part of the brain. This is exploding. The implications here are massive. This is why you get adolescents that are so existential. They're asking the big questions. They're asking the like, who am I? What am I going to do? What's my purpose? And it's important that we don't minimize those things, that we really help them address those questions, because from a spiritual standpoint, this is the time when they're also questioning their relation to God and the existence of God the most. So if we also are not like helping them explore a connection with God, then we're missing a really big opportunity. The ways to do this, I think, like, remember, this is about self-reflection, autobiographical thinking. Really encourage teens to do this journaling, to do reflecting, to take time out of their day in a disciplined, regular way to do some kind of exercise or discipline where they are allowing themselves to reflect on who they are and what they want and their place in the world. So I love journaling. I really recommend it for people. I recommend even daily talk. If they're not writing, maybe just like a sit down with a parent or someone that they trust for 5 minutes every day to talk it through. Okay, this is the DMN. I don't even know why I put this in. I just find it interesting. But these are all the areas. I can tell you about them if you care. Okay. The other part was this maturation, the growth of the prefrontal cortex. Again, the part right behind our brain. This is the executive functioning. This is the planning area. This is the area of the brain where we're able to kind of think of long-term consequences, and that's growing a lot. The issue here during adolescence is there is a gap. We call it the gap in development between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. So I'm going to show you why I keep pointing my hand. So Dr. Siegel uses this. I'm a big fan of it. It's called the hand model of the brain. So if you imagine this is the prefrontal cortex, and this is your limbic system, your amygdala, and all of your emotion center. Emotion center, prefrontal cortex, like executive functioning. It kind of sits, this is the limbic system, It sits here in the middle of your brain. Your prefrontal cortex sits here, right? So what happens when during adolescent development is that the connection between this and the middle of the brain gets bigger and stronger over time, but it takes time to do that. And what happens is that part of it is that sometimes they disconnect. So he calls it flipping your lid. this kind of having all the emotions without the regulation of the prefrontal cortex to keep it under control. So yeah, that's the prefrontal cortex of your brain. So really important during adolescent development that we encourage them to integrate their brain regions. This means that when they're having a big limbic system feeling, like a big emotion, we're stopping and helping them think about the consequences, think about the planning, what could result from any action or desire for a reward. The other integration that's happening is left and right brain. So this area of the brain called the corpus callosum is growing a lot and connecting our kind of like emotional right, creative right brain to our logical left brain. And that's super important. So, interest of time, I want to just take a few minutes to build a toolkit. So a little bit of like science-based tools and things that we can use as parents to kind of help us regulate and make a good choice in how we respond, but also teach our adolescents to use. They are teachable and they really do work. So I'm going to breeze through them, and if you want more details, we can do that. But the first one is using what's called SIFT, which is a tool where you pause and observe, and you take a second. This is really good when you're in a high emotional state, to pause and to take a second to do some self-reflecting. Again, what you're doing here is actually a brain exercise that's helping strengthen all of these things that we talked about in a healthier way. So to do a SIFT means that you stop and you first take stock of your sensations. You're asking, what am I feeling in my body? You're noticing any tightness. You're noticing, if you have like butterflies in your stomach, or like you're feeling flushed, or your like muscles are tense in your fists, right? Then you do go through the images. What are some of the images that are going through my mind? This could include like memories. If you're like having a fight, are you imagining all the other times that like this kind of thing happened and the way that you were disrespected in the past? Then you're going to take stock of your feelings. It's really important. This seems hokey, but it's really important when you're taking stock of feelings to name them. One of the tools I talk about is called, it's very simple. It's to name it is to tame it, okay? So that you pause, and when you identify the emotion, and when you teach your adolescent to identify the emotion, when you give it the actual name, you develop the connection between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. Because you're stopping and calling it its name, you can tame it, have more control. So it's very simple. It's harder than it sounds, but it's a simple concept of just like stopping and specifically naming. I am feeling frustrated and confused. I am feeling sad and discouraged, right? Like to give it very clear names, that makes a difference. And when you teach your adolescent to do that, because then you can do something with it. Okay. So then the next part is the thoughts. You're breaking down what thoughts are running through my mind. You're looking for like self-talk, then like are you discouraging yourself and that kind of thing. Kind of related to the SIFT is doing what's called a time in, which is when you set aside time to kind of be free from distraction and to do some reflection. Usually I recommend, doing some kind of like meditative exercise, and this can be a prayerful meditation. It can be these are some of my favorite verses for reflection and meditation. So you can use a Bible verse. I think also, honestly, the liturgy and hymns and church and liturgical things are a really good time to practice the skill. And what it looks like is you are taking time to focus inward, and you're choosing something to bring all your attention to. So whether it's like the words of the liturgy or the Bible verse or my breathing, and then you've made that choice, and now you're going to allow yourself to try to focus on that. And every time your mind drifts and goes away, because it will, it absolutely will, especially if you're new to this, you notice it, you take stock of what you're feeling when that happens, and you gently bring it back. And you do this once, twice, 1,000 times. Just do it over and over. It's that bringing back that is the brain exercise. So don't be discouraged when your brain drifts. It's actually, in my opinion, good because it gives you an opportunity to do the brain work. Think of it like lifting weights. So the more that you are, lifting weights, it's painful, it's repetitive, but every time you bring your brain back to refocusing on, the words of the liturgy, refocusing on your prayer, refocusing on the Bible verse, refocusing on your breath, every time you do that, you are strengthening those brain connections. So we do that for ourselves, one, because it's just a good practice, but two, it allows us to be in a better place for adolescents, and also I encourage us to teach this to our adolescents. This is a really important skill. Any questions or thoughts about this? I'm kind of inclined, because it's already a little after 12, to call it. And if you want to go through any more of these, I'm happy to. But I don't want to keep you trapped here. So, any kind of thoughts, questions, concerns, stories? Of course.
For teenagers or younger kids, if you haven't been putting these into practice, how do you introduce such a new way of approach to like your family?
Absolutely. So I think the one to start with is the name it to tame it one. So I think that's a really good entry point. Say like, hey, I notice that the parents and the kids, we all struggle with whatever this issue is, like, getting really upset and then, hitting each other or throwing things or whatever it is. Then once we've identified that, we say like, I want us all to grow in it. So let's start with, when we're having a big emotion, let's practice, and I'll do this as a grown-up and I'll help you do it as a kid. Let's practice stopping and naming the feeling that we're having. And if you're not sure, that's okay. Tell me what you're thinking, tell me what you're feeling, and I'll help you figure out a name that fits. So I'd say start with that. Then once you have that under control, the one I like after that is the connect before redirect. So this is, I guess I'm gonna go through them. Marina's fault. What connect before redirect means is that you, first, when there's any kind of conflict or challenge, you start with validating the person's experience, trying to connect. Sometimes that means letting it cool down a little. So that means not talking, even if you're like, you need to teach them the thing they did wrong, you're just waiting a little bit until their amygdala is less on fire and they're a little bit able to access the prefrontal cortex amygdala connection. So then once they're calm enough to do that, you empathize first, and then you can redirect calmly. Then you can choose to open up this discussion towards the next solution or the next steps and so on. So, for instance, if a teenager is upset about a bad grade, they're coming home, they're grumpy, they're like shutting themselves in their room. When you're able to engage with them, you start with not giving them a lecture on like, you should have studied more, or it's not a big deal. None of that. You start with empathizing and connecting. It's okay to feel frustrated. It stinks to get a bad grade, and especially if you've really tried, and it can be really frustrating. And then once they feel heard, then you could say, okay, all right, Habibi, now that we know what this feels like, can we talk a little bit about like what we can do, like, so that we can prepare for the next test? What worked, what didn't work, and let me know how I can help you with that. So that's kind of the connect and then redirect strategy. So that's the second thing I would do if you're completely new to this. Then I would do the kind of like the time in, the meditation type things, the prayerful mindfulness. The wheel of awareness is fantastic. It works wonders. It is very advanced though. So this is kind of like the last thing. And it's basically this meditation thing, but you're going through 4 different areas. You're going through all the 5 senses, then you're going through the bodily sensations. That 6th one is kind of like the feeling of like the pit in your stomach, or that kind of like internal bodily sense. And then the mental activities, what are you feeling, what are you thinking? And then the interconnection, your connection to others, the world, to God, to planet Earth, so on and so forth. So it's that kind of like doing that meditation through each step, and you go through the wheel. Yes. Did that answer your question, Marina? I'll assume it did. Any other? No worries. Oh, awesome. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
I wonder why there's such a wide spectrum of what teenagers look like and act like. So this is super helpful, and I think provides a lot of grace, and you can see that maybe what seems like chaotic, but really just sounds like it's perfect color. But sometimes you see teenagers and you're like, oh my goodness, what? And then you see others, and at least to the eye from the outside, it's like, oh, they're able to manage. They're not as unpredictable.
So here's my opinion about this. All teenagers are a chaotic mess. All of them. Even the ones that look amazing. They're all a mess. When you sit and actually talk to a teenager, they're just a jumble of insanity, just purely. That's not an exception, right? There's just not an exception. What happens is that there's some, for all kinds of, I think, complicated reasons, both like temperament, kind of personality-wise and environmental-wise, some are more internalizing with their chaos, and some are more externalizing with their chaos. I think that's all it is, right? So all of this insanity is happening for all of them. And if you think back, on your own, I think back as myself as a teenager. Everyone around me thought I was an angel. I was a goody two-shoes. I was always doing the right thing. But I remember what it was like in my head, and I was insane. I was on fire internally. I was just super duper good at masking it and appearing really nice and whatever. But inside, all this nonsense is happening still. So that's my opinion. All teenagers are going through this. Just some are better at internalizing it, and some are better at express it more externally. And it's sad to me that we give the attention only to the external, because sometimes the internal thing is really dangerous, right? These are the kids that hold it in, and then act impulsively and do something like hurt themselves or hurt others or take a risk, because then it just all builds up. So, I think I approach each teen as if they're ready to explode, and then go from there. That's how I do it. Yeah. So the key is, you are going to get nowhere if you're saying don't hang out with these people. You're going to get nowhere, because they could even say yes. They probably will. Most of them will, to avoid conflict, will say yes and then do it anyway. They're smart. They're resourceful. They will figure out a way to hang out with who they want to hang out if you're saying no. The key, I think, there's two things. One is you're trying to help them understand, not just the don't do it, but a little bit about what is going on, so that you're concerned about these types of friends or this group. And then the second thing is you want to help direct them and give them opportunities for other social peer experiences. So you got to replace. You can't just say no and shut out the opportunity. You've got to replace. Hi, kiddos. Welcome. We're talking about teenagers. So any other, did I answer that question, Steve? Kind of. Good. I'm glad it was helpful. But please reach out to me if there's anyone I could help. I'd be happy to if it's an interest and I'm invited to. I'd be happy to. Okay. Why don't we just say a quick prayer just to wrap things up, and then, all right. Okay, guys, we're going to say a quick prayer, and then we're going to wrap it up. Thank you, kids, for joining us for the prayer. What a blessing. All right. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Dear God, I thank you for how you made us. You made us in your image, and you made us with wisdom and grace. God, can you teach us how to remember and learn about all of the things of how you made us and how we can connect to each other. And even when things are hard and challenging, remember that we can depend on you, and that you can teach us how to love each other the way that you love us. In your name we pray all these things. Amen. Where's my blessing? We could do them all this.